Thank you for tuning in to watch our Invest Houston launch conference. You're about to watch panel number 2, Education Reform. Enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hello. There we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this education panel. I'm excited to get to hear from some of our higher education leaders in the Houston area. And specifically, you heard a lot of discussion about technology in the healthcare forum. And so you're going to hear a little bit about that in the educational panel as well. So conversations surrounding the state of education abound, not just in Houston, but around the nation. In this panel entitled Education Reform, Pathways to Access and Quality Learning Experiences Through Policy, Technology, and Community Engagement, these panelists will discuss their perspectives on the accessibility of higher education and strategies to ensure that no student is left behind. I had a fantastic, humorous icebreaker question to surprise them with, but I was told we don't have time. So instead, we will start with this rather dry question, but meaty. We'll get right to it. How can schools and educational institutions ensure that technology enhances rather than hinders the learning experience? And again, please reintroduce yourself to the crowd as you answer this first question.
Alisa White, Sam Houston State University. So we have more than 21,000 students in 3 locations, and these 3 locations are Huntsville, Conroe, and the Woodlands. And our students have different access to they do have actually different access to healthcare, but also to broadband. So the first thing we have to do is make sure they have access to broadband, and they don't always. We have a lot of students who are first generation. We have a lot of students, and that just means they're the first in their families to go to college. About half of our students are the first. About half of them are Pell eligible, which means they don't have a strong family income. And a lot of them work, 70 to 80% of them work. And so they're on the roads. And so you'll see if there is an ice storm, which when I moved here 4 years ago, I had no idea that there would be ice storms here. But if there's an ice storm, we don't just say go online, because that means they're all on the roads trying to get to McDonald's to use their Wi-Fi. And so one is making sure they've got broadband. How do we do that? We work in those kind of extreme environments to make sure they have hotspots. Using their devices, almost everybody has a phone. Even little kids have a phone. How can we actually put course materials on the phone? How can we put ourselves in the position of our students? I dropped my car off this morning for service. It was easy to drop it off. It took me 4 days to schedule an appointment because their online platform was not making sense and not congruent with what they said their service schedule would be. Well, what happens if you've got an 18-year-old in a class and you're saying the syllabus says this, but when I go to the online platform, it's telling me something else? Well, that student may not sit there for an hour, try to figure it out, but the student says, I'll go back later, and then the student's behind. So making sure that we take the position of the student trying to access the technology and making sure that our instructions and abilities are clear.
Howdy, my name is Mike Fossum. I'm the leader or the chief operating officer of the Galveston campus of Texas A&M University. My career started 48 years ago when I started as a freshman at Texas A&M University in engineering. I spent 36 years in the Air Force and NASA before I heard the call and the opportunity to serve my alma mater, leading the Galveston campus. The Galveston campus is the Marine and Maritime campus of Texas A&M University, which is a Tier 1 institution. It's the oldest institution of higher education in the state of Texas and a land grant university. So our explicit mission is to educate and support the future workforce for the state of Texas. In addition to their academic education, all of our students are also steeped, not just in our Aggie traditions and culture, but in our Aggie core values of respect and excellence in leadership, loyalty, integrity, and selfless service. Those transcend all programs and technologies and really are vital in every future workplace. Now, the rate of change and impact of technology continues to accelerate, and that's been true for 48 years. When I started at Texas A&M as a student, computers filled up rooms, maybe not quite this big, but large rooms. There was no such thing as a small computer. There was a really great thing, though. Back then, calculators did not have batteries at all, didn't need recharging. I have my original calculator in my pocket. For you youngsters, that's a slide rule. And this is actually what I started with as a student in engineering at Texas A&M. Calculators existed, but I couldn't afford one. And so I struggled my way through and then found a way to pay for one after the couple of semesters. And that has continued in so many different ways, and we've heard it. You know, and the ways, one of the specific ways we talk about access to technology and computers for students in college, and creating those learning environments. And we've had to recreate those, especially after COVID, where students came back. They went so much online, buried online in different ways, and even out of school, out of the contact with fellow students and teachers. And so we're creating places to bring them back and to create communities in different ways. And one way is really reimagining our library with more study and collaboration spaces. It's open 18 hours a day. The library's got public use computers and printers, in addition to rooms with other technology, cameras, video equipment, you know, et cetera, that they need for projects and learning and group work and stuff. We also have at least one, because not everything's about going digital, one physical copy of every textbook for every class at our university, at our campus in the library, so students who can't afford them can go in there to use them as a reference and check them out. We're also, like others mentioned earlier, looking at artificial intelligence and chat GPT, and the whole university is working on that. You know, that because there's a lot of aspects to that. So in the work world, it's a great tool, but when you're trying to educate them, you're trying to teach them the thinking. And so we have to be careful that the education they get allows them to develop the critical thinking, the ability to assemble different facts and ideas into coherent thought without just plugging it in and having it spit out. So that's the things we're working on now. Technology, where it's helping us though, you know, is a virtual counseling center that we have. It's up in the last year. In addition to the counselors that are on campus and available to them, you know, and other advisors and coaches, the 24-hour access is huge. It gets a lot of use in the middle of the night when students just need to reach out to somebody, and that's great. Another thing we do to help plug them in to reestablish that sense of community is something we call Hullabaloo U. All incoming freshmen that are first time in college are enrolled in these non-credit classes. And the biggest part of that is establishing community, making friends, and working with staff and faculty that in those small groups, so that it really connects them and it helps them really be healthy and much more successful. We know, because we track the students that are involved in that attend that, do much better, and we see them the next year, which is what we want.
So is this working? Okay, great. So I'm Bob Keith. I'm the new dean of the Cameron School of Business. And I do think I used that slide rule one time in my career. I'm going to come at this from very much a business perspective. I spent the first 30 years of my career in the business world. I was the CEO of 2 companies. And over the last 10 years, I have migrated into the academic world and worked on a number of very interesting projects related to academic innovation. Now, having said that, I am a huge fan of Clay Christensen in his theory around disruptive innovation. So, and I actually think that the first panel talking about AI was very enlightening in healthcare, because when we think about technologies in the academic world, it's the same kind of idea that was espoused in the earlier conversations, which is AI, for example, is an enabling technology. It's an enabling technology. AI by itself doesn't do anything. And what has to happen is a so-called business model needs to be put around that enabling technology in order to sort of accelerate it, if you will, in terms of achieving the outcomes that it wants. And in the academic world, the business model is still true, but it's more of a learning model. And so it's sort of redesigning the learning model to access and leverage things like AI. So again, I think what's happening with the sort of emerging technologies is It's disrupting things, good and bad. And yes, we do need to think about the ethical nature of things like AI. But what it's doing, it's recreating new space for sort of reimagining what learning should be, or what kind of outcomes could we achieve with this technology. So technology is not the answer, but it's part of a solution that could increase access, increase quality, so on and so forth. So that's I'm going to say that about sort of the business side of it, if you will.
No, that's great. I heard Bob say that AI is redesigning the learning model. And if you've been in education lately, or if you're a parent, you know that memorization of facts has gone away. There's nothing a student needs to be told in class because that they can't look up on Google. And so we challenge our educators all the time is, what value do you bring to the classroom? Because they can get all the facts that they want from just looking it up on their phones. So you've really got to, as you say, you've got to take your education to the next level if you're going to add value to that experience. All right, so we talked about, you especially talked about improving the infrastructure and the needs there for access. What are some of the most promising policy innovations? So let's get into government and policy to address educational disparities. And what are some of the most promising innovations you've observed that maybe increase both the access and quality of that education?
So the policy issues are big, and we have the fortunate blessing, really, of being in a state that funds education. I have worked in a number of states, and I'm a native Texan, so I'll disclose that. But Texas funds higher education generally. We never have enough, but we have a whole lot more than a lot of other states. And so their attitude toward higher ed is a lot more favorable in terms of understanding that people do need access to college. And so I'm going to use an example that's not even from my sector. You know, we are a research extensive R2 institution with a medical school, and we do a lot of research. But the state did a really cool thing last legislative session by funding community colleges at a level they have never done before. And that was to provide access to people to whom affordability is not the number one issue, but it is the only issue. And so if you think about access, a lot of it has to do with money. And so I would look at federal policy. Right now, there's a push to double Pell, which means to offer students $13,000 a year so that they could apply it at any university or college to go. It hasn't been approved, but it's something that we're working on, just trying to get more dollars in the hands of people who need it to go to college. The other thing that's really important, I think, is supporting students who work. You know, I mentioned a lot of our students work. 70 to 80% of them work. People love to hire our graduates because they know how to work. They show up on time. They don't have that entitled idea that you read about. I don't know where those kids are because they're not our students, and probably not yours either, right? That's just not our culture here. So how can you offer classes, not just online, but in a hybrid version, or at night, or on weekend, or in a short term, where a working parent, we had a 15-year-old graduate with a bachelor's degree a couple of years ago. A year after or before, we had a 75-year-old graduate with a degree in physics, probably with a slide rule right there. Right. So some of it is the approach to when you offer classes, making it student-centered. How can that student actually go? How can we remove those barriers? And then just finding dollars to keep higher ed affordable. I'll say one last thing is a lot of the price of education is because it takes students too long to get through, and it's their living expenses. And if you look nationally, a lot of the students who have a lot of debt are maximizing what they're borrowing, and they're sending money home to their parents. Think about that.
Okay, thank you. I've got to agree. I mean, the number one thing is more funding for the education, for the higher education. I think there's a factoid that I picked up in Austin last year, though, does relate to the amount of funding that we get for higher education. I think for primary and secondary education, it's really good. For getting better. For junior colleges, for what they call workforce development, it's very, very strong. But for 42 years ago in Texas, 80% of the cost of a university degree, of a university education, was covered by the state. 80% was covered by the state 20 years ago. Today, 80% is covered by the students. So there's been an erosion over time that it really hurts. Now, there's help for the needy that are Pell eligible. They're there, but for those, primarily it's middle-class kind of students that don't meet that threshold for the federal help. There's not enough available to help them. That's really the bulk of the students. That's the bulk of the future workers for Texas. And so finding more scholarships, more opportunities, and for all of us also the challenge to maintain costs. In the last legislative session, we did get a bump from the Texas legislature that helped. So the numbers I had preceded that bump. But anyway, it is big. I'm going to talk, shift a little bit and be very specific, because part of this question is also about meeting the adaptability to meet local needs. So I'm going to speak about one that we're growing to meet right now. One of the things we have is the Texas A&M Maritime Academy. At our campus, there's one of only 6 of these institutions in the United States who produce graduates with a bachelor's or master's degree and their Coast Guard license to serve as officers on commercial ships. Now, we're the only program in the Gulf of Mexico or the southern United States that have this. Why is this important? Well, 90% of everything you use, wear, consume, or drive travels on the water before it gets to you. Go look at the labels. They didn't fly here. It came on boats. And Texas itself has been the #1 exporting state for 22 straight years. If Texas was a country, we'd have the 8th largest economy in the world. That's just Texas, okay? The business that comes through those ports, the port of Houston alone, not including the others, is 20% of the GDP of Texas. So it's huge. At our last career fair in last spring, we had companies on our campus. We set a record for the most number of companies ever trying to hire our graduates. The ones that were trying to hire the mariners with this license were trying to hire over 1,000 this year. And they're talking to me because their businesses are being crippled. It's affecting the supply chain. They're crying out for more. It's also that shortage of mariners is affecting both economics, security, and national security. The federal government is tying up military supply ships, 17 of them right now, because they can't put crews on them. This is our mission. We must reduce the cost of the program. You get more students into this particular niche that you cannot meet any other way. And so that's our highest priority right now to do that.
Okay, so I'm going to come at this from a private university perspective. So number one, the University of St. Thomas has done some wonderful things to create more affordable access to high quality private education. There's the Rising Stars program, which is just phenomenal. It looks a little bit like a Cristo Rey model, if you're familiar with that from a high school perspective. And secondly, there's also the St. Thomas Promise, which has been a wonderful program as well. So I think all schools, public and private, are looking for ways of enhancing that affordability and that access to high quality education. That being said, I will tell you where I believe, whether it's federal, state, or even foundation funding should be directed towards, is innovation and experimentation in terms of how do we make how do we create new innovative models for a variety of different student profiles? How do we do that to allow more individuals accessing different options, and for those options to be not only more affordable, but actually more relevant to what they might be interested in? So I'm a huge proponent, of experiential learning. I have a lot of experience in terms of experiential learning. And whether it's in the business world or in any other discipline, experiential learning, I think, is one of the keys to long-term success for the academic world. Providing more opportunities to engage downstream into the business community, in our case, or other enterprises, but really funding the innovation around those kinds of ideas, I think is really where the funding should be directed.
Well, that's a great lead in, Bob. I'm going to ask you a specific question. Talking about that experiential learning, how can community engagement be leveraged to enhance educational programs and student success? And what's different in the terms of those relationships? I'm guessing that's where they get those experiences from. What's different in terms of those relationships established with businesses today compared to 5 or 10 years ago?
So a lot of questions there. Let me say this, is that, again, over the last 10 years, I've had a lot of opportunity, a privilege, if you will, to really be a part of some very innovative programs. And I think one of the key areas is really in community engagement, whether that be the business community or civil society in general. And I'll tell you, I think the whole landscape is changing in terms of where the innovators in the academic world, what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to, if you will, forward integrate into the business community and into civil society. And I think as a result of that, the boundaries between, let's say, high school, undergraduate, and let's call it the real world, those boundaries are beginning to blur more in terms of what the innovators are trying to do, both going backwards into the high school and, let's say, homeschooling markets, and forward again into the business community. So I'm going to give you 2 examples that I've been associated with. One was at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. I was there at the business school, and we entered into a very innovative partnership with a gentleman named Michael Porter from Harvard Business School. He has an initiative, one of his many initiatives. It's called the Initiative for the Competitive Inner City. And it's basically a program that's sort of like a mini MBA program for small and medium-sized enterprises in urban areas. So we were thinking, since the university was basically in an urban area and we had lots of businesses around us, what could we do to sort of engage with those enterprises kind of in our backyard? So we collaborated with Michael Porter's initiative, and we ended up recruiting 100 small and medium-sized enterprises in kind of our local area. They went through a sort of a mini MBA program. Michael Porter, if you know him, he actually was so excited about this opportunity, he came down and taught them the strategy component. But what we did was, in addition to having 100 small and medium-sized enterprises kind of in our orbit, we wrapped an academic program around that to give some of our students an opportunity to engage with them, both as they were going through the mini MBA, and then in the spring, they were involved in basically an apprenticeship with some of those enterprises. So really blurring the boundaries. The small and medium-sized enterprises were very interested in having young talent help them, and our students were very engaged in terms of understanding what the real business world was like, particularly for these SME type companies. The second example I'll give real quickly, I was asked to lead a project in Tucson, Arizona. And the provost said to me, Bob, I want you to help design a novel business program. And one of the design criteria was it had to be delivered for less than $10,000 a year. Okay, and this is a private university. Well, I said, perfect, we can throw everything out and we can start from scratch and rebuild it. So what we did was we used business-like building principles. We used design thinking, lean startup, the whole 9 yards. We engaged with more than 600 members of the Tucson community, students, high school principals, business leaders, the mayor, the bishop, the whole 9 yards. And we co-designed and co-created and co-launched a program that had many components of experiential learning in it. And that was launched, and that's up and running now. So again, it's blurring those boundaries and really doing some innovative things with, if you will, your back-end partners, which are the employers. So.
Yeah, fabulous. All right, Colonel Fossum, this is for you. You mentioned that Texas A&M is very focused on research, and you just exceeded $20 million annually in grant expenditures. How important are these research efforts to the success of the overall marine industry, considering the next closest program that produces such specialized graduates is in New York?
Well, thank you. We're really proud of reaching that $20 million level just in this last year with a small 2,300 students on our campus and only about 150 research faculty. Our world specifically, it's the oceans, coastlines, coastal communities, it's the seagoing transportation, the quest for cleaner alternatives, engineering, maritime, port business, and operations, all integrated into a sustainable ecosystem of operations. We like to call it the blue economy, the interplay between the economic, the social, the political, and the ecological stability of our oceans. It really encompasses everything. We've got the ship operations. I've got two of my maritime cadets right over here that, yeah. These are the people that are going to be driving the boats, the engineers that are designing them. We're working on the cleaner energy associated with them. At the same time, you look at our campus, and we've got wetlands and coastlines in Galveston Bay, and you look across and you see Texas City. And that's the refineries, the industry, and they've all got to live and work together. That's our world. Our back door is the port of Galveston, right there. Ships from all over the world are literally at the back door of our campus. They've all got to work together. So research is actually embedded in all of our educational enterprises. About 80% of our undergraduate students are involved in research during their time there, which transforms their education. It better prepares them for jobs or grad schools and really helps them internalize what they're really talking about because they got their hands on it. In our case, they often got dirty with it because they're out in those marshes, et cetera. And there's been a lot of changes on our campus too. We have a new college that we just celebrated the start of at the beginning of this semester, the new Texas A&M University College of Marine Sciences and Maritime Studies. This is on par with every other college and school within the greater 78,000 student Texas A&M University. And we have a new dean, Dr. Debbie Thomas, who's also sitting right over here. Say hi, Debbie. And she volunteers to come and be on this panel next year, by the way. We have a new associate dean for research and graduate studies who's bringing in an incredible amount of energy and passion and drive. He's already lighting things up in a very major way. And he told me on Monday, we're going to be at 40 million in 5 years. So, a lot of great things are going on. And what are we doing? We're doing the coastal flooding and coastal resiliency. That was really led by Dr. Sam Brody, who is now known as a national expert in that area. And that spun off into the resilient infrastructures as the changing coastlines and weather patterns, et cetera. We got the pollution impacts and the mitigation of the pollution. The industry's got to live together with the natural environment and the hardcore analytical support in the biogeochemistry, et cetera, the clean energy. So there's a lot of great things going on, and there's more great things to come. Thank you.
Yeah. And Dr. White, finally for you, you've talked a little bit about educational equity and quality, but what are some specific initiatives that you've implemented or supported that address these disparities in access to higher education, and what outcomes have you observed?
So our newest venture, we also just started a new college, and it's SHSU Polytechnic College. And the idea is that we want to work with industry very specifically to produce graduates who can solve some of the labor shortages that we're having in our area. And our students don't really have an issue getting jobs, and we want to make sure they're not just getting that next job, but they're prepared for a life of work. So when they start as first-year students, we have modules as freshmen for them to be involved in our career center and learn the language of work and learn the language of the hiring supervisor. So if they're English majors, they know that they could get a six-figure income being grant writers and grant and proposal managers and that kind of thing. And so we are taking students wherever they are. Maybe they don't see themselves as candidates for a four-year degree, but they can come in and get a stackable credential or a certificate. We talked to someone who owns a business recently who has got this really unique business in restoring windows and doors of historic homes. That's a little bit different niche than someone in construction management Well, what if you had a construction management person who now has a certificate in restoration? Or you have someone who comes in and cleans up after floods. We were all, holding our breath this week, but what happens if there had been a flood? Well, it's not just about cleanup, but how do you restore? And so we're looking at working with industry partners for certificates. Students can come in, get that credential, go right to work, and then come back and matriculate into a 4-year degree. And so we think that the idea of being very relevant to the workforce gives students an opportunity to find that connection early, gives parents and spouses who are really sacrificing to help their student go to school feel confident in the value proposition of higher ed. And we're telling Texas, we're going to produce the workforce so that you don't have to go out of state and bring them in.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Final question. Just give us your 60-second elevator speech. Why is higher education still the best pathway to a successful career?
Well, I would say in terms of looking at that kind of a question, I think, and it goes back to what was just said, it's all about a matter of relevance in terms of what is the job to be done, in terms of what the student's needing, what's the job to be done in terms of what the employer is looking for, and how can we put together an initiative, a package, a program, multiple pathways in order for them to succeed. We believe that we can prepare students for the short term in terms of being career ready. I'd like to think that every student that comes out of the business school, even though they won't have a certificate that says this, they'll be effectively graduating with a minor in workforce readiness in terms of being able to hit the ground running. Okay, that's in sort of the short term. The long term, we want to give them a deeper meaning. I went to the Wharton School, and I tell young people that there's probably nothing I'm going to tell you right now that I learned at the Wharton School. That being said, I learned how to learn. Okay, so it's a lifelong learning. And I think when we talk about the demographic cliff and things of that nature, I sort of take a different look at that because there are huge opportunities for lifelong learning in terms of upskilling and reskilling and things of that nature. And I think it's really looking as to where it's almost like skating to where the puck's going. And I think that's really going to be an important area, is providing the value proposition for that lifelong learning in addition to what we're doing undergrad and grad in terms of our regular programs.
Okay, 60 seconds. Heck, so how do you communicate? For the Galveston campus, we're tied into the maritime world, the sciences, the engineering, the operations. That is a very, very tight community. So we're in touch with all of these companies. We live close to them. They come on our campus, they guest lecture. Our recent graduates come back and coach our current students and tell them the classes they ought to take to get ready for the kind of job I've got and the career path forward. So we're very tied into the needs of the workforce. There's an excellent return on investment. That's the biggest thing to understand. Some jobs require the university degree, the college education, and the experiential learning as part of that education to prepare you to go out there and be ready to really excel. That is what we do. That's what we're the best at. Aggies roll up their sleeves and get the job done. Thanks.
Gig 'em.
Eat 'em up, cats. So just gonna say, I mentioned before about being prepared for a life of work. The data are clear. People with a degree are more resilient in an economic downturn. If they lose their jobs, they find new ones faster. Their health outcomes are better. And we talk a lot about, is education worth it? Well, the people who are wondering that want their kids to go to college. Why don't they want your kids to go to college? We want the very best for our families. We want people who invest in their communities. Our motto is a measure of a life is its service. I want to thank you for your service to our country. I love this nation. I feel patriotic. I want people to come through SAM and know that they have an obligation to invest in their communities, to serve each other. You learn that and you learn about people who are different from you, and you learn about families, and you learn about life that's not just about the next 5 minutes, but the life after the life, and learning to learn. And so I still think higher ed is the very best option out there. And I want to thank my parents who did not give us a whole lot. Actually, they gave us a whole lot, but they made sure we had an education because they knew after that we could take care of ourselves. I still believe.
Well said. Thank you so much. Give it up for our education panel.